It's a Friday, July 4th weekend. It's super hot. There's nobody in town. I was out and about a little bit earlier today, and I didn't think I was going to be doing a video, but here I am. What else do I have to do? So I'm going to start off, first of all, somebody shook up Rick Beato. It's almost like we need to talk about Rick Beato. He's now put out, I think, 2 videos sort of panicking over everyone's reaction. And it was the same video that I reacted to last week or whatever it was. His comments about music's too easy to make, no one cares about music anymore, it's too easy to consume, all those things. He's reeling, the poor guy. I think you guys should appreciate, I know I do, I appreciate Rick Beato. He's a genuine music lover. He is clearly talented, very knowledgeable and very talented at his thing. I was thinking though, it's like this whole yelling at the clouds thing that people are accusing him of and about music and everything. I think it's going to be funny that somewhere down the line, people are going to be complaining that, there aren't enough genuine YouTube guys like the good old Rick Beato was. Somewhere down the line when having a YouTube channel becomes a degree that you can get at some university, and everyone goes back and looks at Rick Beato videos and goes, he was onto it when he was doing this, when he was doing the what makes this song great, and what's these Sting interviews and things like that. I mean, his rebuttal to the idea that he's not out of touch. I think that's crazy to say that the guy's out of touch. But I know people are going to accuse him of being out of touch. And they are accusing him of being out of touch. I will say this, and it's not a shot at him, but I said it to another friend of mine this week when I was talking about it a little bit. Like the rock, he's a rock jazz guy. I mean, he's obviously more into rock music than he is anything else. And then he's probably into jazz. He's into Pat Metheny and various other dudes that he's had on the channel. But let's just hope that Rick doesn't go anywhere near hip hop, because that would be the uncomfortableness that I think he needs to avoid. This, according to someone's comment, wow, this is the best hip hop channel I've found this year. Keep it up, pimpin'. Yeah, okay. I'm going to go over a couple of the comments quickly, and I'm going to get into some mixing engineering thoughts that I think will relate back to some of these comments. In no particular order, someone asks, curious about your thoughts on gain staging in the box. It's highly contentious on YouTube. What isn't? Do you follow the analog ways of using a VU meter, especially the gain accordingly to analog plugins? Or are you of the as long as it's not clipping ilk? First of all, I gotta admit, to some degree, I didn't even know what the term gain staging 100% meant. I had a kind of I think it's a fancy term. So I kind of looked it up, and I found a video on YouTube by a company that I like, Isotope, and I use a bunch of their plugins and have for years. And they did a video on gain staging, and I was laughing every 30 to 45 seconds, because to me it's so somewhat logical or basic in that along your time in learning how to mix and mixing, you're developing a feel for how things are overloading or not overloading. Whether you're hitting the mix bus too hard or not hitting it hard enough. These are all sort of intuitive things that you need to develop, as opposed to getting into this whole sort of like academia way of looking at it. Like, oh, okay, if my kick drum is hitting at -3 on the VU, then I'm in a good place to with regards to how things are going to be hitting the mix bus. To me, that's nuts. I think that where they've got it a little mixed up is that there are guys, and I know some of these guys from years ago, that mixed. They referenced the stereo VUs as they were fine-tuning their mix. But this was after they got to a place where they felt like their balance was cool. You're sort of always looking around at all the meters on your console. And I'll refer to the DAW as your console. I think, as I get further into this a little bit later in the video, which hopefully won't be too long, I'll talk about a couple of different ways you could look at gain staging, so that you can, mix without thinking, mix to find something that feels good. Another guy said, YouTube tutorials have really messed me up. I was way more creative. Now I think a lot of us are overly concerned with right versus wrong. Yeah, I mean, they're kind of related. I've seen a fair share of tutorials that are just mind-numbing. Keep in mind, a lot of times those things are being put together to somewhere backdoor selling something. You need to spend more time in the studio. You need to spend more time mixing. You need to. Here's a little trick for you that costs you nothing. Back in the day, we used to we would get free studio time at the studio we were based out of, let's just say. And that meant like, hey, no one's in the room. Can I get in there? And it would be like, yeah, sure, go ahead. I need to like work on learning more SSL automation or something like that. They didn't even care. It was just like, hey, go in there. As long as you zero out the console when you're done, make it look like you were never there, clean the heads on the tape deck, you were good to go. So what would you do? You would go in there with a tape, and a lot of us had like a 2-inch reel, a work reel. Sometimes you'd borrow another guy's work reel. And what would be on that work reel would be like a song that somebody tracked, that most likely somebody made a copy of onto their reel, so that you had this safety reel that, in case something happened to it, there would be no issues. No one would get hurt. So you'd go in and you would throw this reel up, and there would be a track sheet, and you'd quickly start. The game was basically try and get a blend or balance or a mix going real quick. And depending how lazy you were or not, or what you were experimenting with, you wouldn't even patch in like inserts or anything. You would just go with the console, which had EQ, compression, and everything. Maybe you would patch in for sure reverb, so that when you put up the vocal, you could throw a little reverb on it. But my point is, you would get this mix up, and then kind of get a feel for like, okay, that's cool. And then you would just pull all the faders down and zero out the console, and right away just go have another go at it. So during the course of 2 or 3 hours, you might try mixing that thing 3 times. And this each time would result in more experimentation and more building that feel for like, okay, this time I'm going to go for a little more of this. This time I'm going to concentrate a little more on drums. I'm going to concentrate a little more on getting the vocal to pop. That's the big tip for right now. This other guy says, never use quantized. No need, if you're a musician, to have feel, which defines what it is to be a real musician. I mean, yes, but we're talking about, in this case, when we're talking about Dilla, we're talking about 90s hip hop. Quantize is appropriate for a lot of that, for a lot of things. And quantize can be a tool, and a thing to experiment with, a thing to innovate with, which leads me kind of into another thing, is that, you know, the cool thing about hip hop, the cool thing about rock or grunge or maybe jazz, whatever. On the production tip, the thing that made hip hop was that we were improvising a lot because things were new. There were like a lot of worlds colliding. The major recording studio environment with the basement hip hop producer element. So like those worlds were colliding, and you were improvising, trying to figure out ways to make it all work. Improvising is a big part of recording, mixing, production. If you're not improvising, if you're constantly copying, what are you going to end up with? You're going to end up with something that's, you know, exactly like the person that you're super influenced by or the thing that you're super referencing. So that was the quantized thing. I'm going fast. I had this crazy Starbucks can of something double shot or something. I had to cut it with a little bit of water. That's how wild it is. One guy says, oh yeah, really cool technique. This was about the triggering the sine wave with a gate to create a kick. And it gives me a long list of plugins. He says you could do this without all that routing with these plugins. I mean, that wasn't the point. The point was, this is how we did it, making the hip hop that you like. I think, you know, it's funny because I did that video, the last video I did with the stem, some guy called it stems, now he's got me saying it. The mult of the sample, the mult of the loop, and creating the different layers, I'm going to call them. It's funny, as I was doing that, and I hadn't done it in a while, I realized, wow, that's a big part of why things sounded why they did. It was because of that crude or improvisational way of doing it that it has like a wacky sound to it. You know, a lot of people were asking, is that going to cause phase issues? Is that going to cause EQ? Yeah, it is. But like all of that is sort of part of what makes it what it is. These are the things that make hip hop what hip hop is. If you if you dug deep into grunge and you said, why was Kurt Cobain's guitar sound the way it was? It's probably because he was using a Sans amp as an overdrive pedal when everybody else was using it as an amp simulator. So like all those sort of out of whack ways to use things are a lot of times where the magic is found, you know, where you find ways to come up with something new, innovate. Use it not like it's meant to be used. There's one thing I need to mention is that one of the videos that I happen to like look back through, because someone mentioned something like, at 8:20 you said this. And I was like, what was that? So I have to go back and like watch my own video, which I'm not real big on. But I did notice in one of the videos, I think it's 2 back, I mentioned Swizz Beatz, and I think that part I never talked about, where I said like, oh, that's Swizz Beatz. So the Swizz Beatz thing was, I worked with him on a couple of tracks for the Cameron Confessions of Fire, Cameron's debut album, when he was really like going for it. That was kind of a wild time, and I was working with those guys, that whole entertainment crew, like a lot, months. And so there's 2 stories. One will be for a different video, the one where I did the Pull It song with DMX and Cameron. But the interesting thing about Swizz Beatz, as I'm saying, is that Swizz comes in and he's, most guys didn't, no one brought in their own MPC. It was like a rental. So the MPC 3000 was there, and he had a Trinity keyboard. And I always, when working with anyone that I wasn't totally like familiar with working with, and in this case, Swizz, we weren't like familiar with each other. We had definitely worked around each other here and there. And I said I did like a track with him on DMX's first record. But anyway, he comes in and he's now a little bit more established. And he's messing around making a beat, and you kind of know the sounds. They're the same 5 or 6 sounds that he uses on basically everything. That same kick, same snare, same hat. And then I look at him, he's like he asked for a cable so that he could sample something from the Trinity. And he plugs the cable into the headphone output and then into the sample input of the MPC. And I was like, I kind of like tried not to do a double take, but I was like, hey, do you want me to hook you up to the output of the outputs of the keyboard? He's like, no, this is what I do. And that was like that's one of those moments where you're gonna go like, okay, it's not time to lecture somebody on like, hey, this is why you would want to. This is like, that's what he does, and you have to make it work. You got to go with it. I think the way he did things was, I was trying to like sort of remember it, but he wasn't a keyboard player by any means. But he was like playing these like this little like sequence of notes, and I think what he was doing was he was sampling what he was playing. He kind of had a feel for the tempo because he had the beat sort of ready, and he would play it and sample in what he played on the keyboard, because he wasn't hooked up with MIDI, so this was not a MIDI sequence. So he would sample what he played on the keyboard, that kind of thing, and then he would take that sample, trim it to the top, and put it on the pad, so that when he hit the pad, it would play the whole riff. It's not like he was playing different notes on the pads. He was literally triggering the riff from a pad, not quantized. So there is that element of things, whereas you kind of played around with it and made it work, and that was not a quantized MIDI sequence. I think that's going to do it for Friday night. Thanks for popping through. I think Rick Beato is shook. I think he feels my 4,000 subscriber channel chasing him. I think he feels you guys.